Yes, a couple of examples. One, the SCN9A gene, which has multiple variants, nonsense mutations, complete insensitivity to pain. Other variants give someone an unusually high or an unusually low pain threshold. There's also something like the COMT gene, catechol-methyltransferase, which has two variants, one which is associated with a high, another with a low hedonic set point. But also, here's another example. There is the ADRA2B deletion variant. Sorry, it's a bit of a mouthful. People with that particular variant are pessimistic. They'll see the dark side of life. They will notice and recall much more vividly negative stimuli. Caucasians, majority of Caucasians have this genetic variant. Only perhaps 10% of Rwandans, for example, have this variant. And when choosing to have a child, or perhaps in a decade or two, when gene therapy tools become available, which variant of this gene would you prefer? Other things being equal, it's clearly preferable to be an optimist, to remember more vividly the good things in life, even though, of course, one wants to be very careful if one is aware of the fact that one has an optimistic bias to allow for this cognitively in certain situations. This would be an example of a potential pitfall as well as an opportunity of the new technologies when we use pre-implantation genetic diagnosis. If we ensure that our offspring are all temperamentally optimists, is there a risk of systemic cognitive bias? To which the only reply one can give is yes. But if one is aware of this risk, at least potentially one can counteract it. But once again, it's very easy, particularly if one is giving a synopsis of one's views, to speak in terms of some kind of simplistic genetic determinism. And clearly, the way we behave, the way we think and feel, it is a combination of gene expression and the environment. Genes and culture co-evolved. But nonetheless, simply in virtue of making this small handful of genetic choices, and we can do this already in principle at any rate with pre-implantation genetic diagnosis, we can radically reduce the burden of future suffering. Moreover, this benign process can in principle continue indefinitely as our children and grandchildren equally make benign choices before having children themselves. Yes, the acute effects of MDMA are quite extraordinarily benign. The sensorium remains clear. It's not a psychedelic. It's not a drug in the category of LSD. MDMA triggers this tremendous sense of empathy and love and compassion. It induces tremendous honesty. One can be both honest with oneself and honest towards others. It's very rose-tinted honesty. In terms of the actual mechanism of its action, three neurotransmitters in particular seem to be responsible for its acute effects. The oxytocin released is responsible for this tremendous trust, dissolution of jealousy and competitiveness, this sense of love. I love the world and the world loves me. The serotonin released appears to explain the tremendous emotional flooding and intensity of emotion, and the dopamine released seems to explain the euphoria and activation, and the particular cocktail accounts for the magic of MDMA. On the face of it, at any rate, here we have a hug drug, a love drug, a drug that enables us to be idealized versions of the kind of person you would want to be. Such states could not have evolved and survived on the African savannah, because someone who is loving, kind, trusting, empathetic is extremely vulnerable to predators. But nonetheless, if MDMA-like states were sustainable without side effects indefinitely, then in principle this is a very wonderful, magical state to be. I think there's a risk perhaps of my sounding too lyrical now, but one reason I don't think one can responsibly urge people to go out and take MDMA, quite aside from its legal status, is that it does not sabotage, dismantle the hedonic treadmill. Indeed, regular use can tend to induce a subtle, long drawn out opposite variant of the desirable effects for which people take it. 48 hours later there is typically a serotonin dip, in which people are after which people become rather irritable, anti-empathetic, mood may be subdued. In short, one isn't radically really transforming oneself for the better. I mean, it's different. There are cases of people who have just taken it a handful of times and have had transformative magical experiences, and therapists have used it very successfully to get people to open up. But unfortunately, regular use tends to accentuate the side effects and diminish the magic. I suppose an orthodox response to hearing and reading up on this drug is to focus on the neurotoxic effects and steer people away from it. But I think what we should be aiming for is devising designer drugs that replicate on a safe, sustainable basis these magical effects. Why is the hedonistic imperative abolitionist project not focused on drugs? Essentially because wouldn't it be good if instead of constantly trying to change our default state of consciousness, we were born in a state that was fundamentally satisfactory? If there weren't something extremely unsatisfactory about our normal state of consciousness, humans wouldn't be so keen to change it. Drugs can, in certain circumstances, offer advantages in that taking a particular psychoactive drug can, in principle, offer a much more fine-grained, subtle and reversible alteration of your normal state of mind than a genetic engineering. But nonetheless, I think one could make a case that society ideally would not consist of drug taking at all, in that if we were born with invincible physical, psychological good health, if life really were animated by gradients of bliss, why would we need to take chemicals?